some of you probably know, or maybe most of you know, the most recent developments, but I'll just go over them in case you're not too familiar with it. So for the last year, in Geneva at the United Nations, there's been a working group that's been open to all countries to participate in, that has been tasked with coming up with recommendations for moving forward with multilateral nuclear disarmament. So we're in the situation, as you all know probably, for the last several decades now of stalemate at the UN in terms of anything happening on nuclear weapons. And of course, recently the US and Russia have not been interested in bilateral reductions. They've been more interested in reviving the Cold War, it seems. You have all of the nuclear armed states investing billions of dollars into modernizing nuclear weapons, so basically extending their lives into the indefinite future. Most recently, we just had the vote in the UK over renewal of their Trident missile system, with some extremely concerning statements from some of the UK leadership. Theresa May saying that she's totally willing to incinerate 100,000 people if it was in the UK's interests. So things don't look good. The nuclear armed states really aren't playing ball in terms of their legal obligation to eliminate their nuclear weapons. So for the last few years, concerned states have been gathering in this series of conferences looking at the humanitarian impact of nuclear weapons. This has been really interesting. The nuclear armed states, at least the permanent 5 that are in the Security Council, they boycotted the early ones. The US and the UK came to the later ones, the last one in Vienna. But the interesting thing about this is that it's really taken a sideswipe at nuclear weapons. It's looked at the impact on human bodies and the environment of a nuclear weapon detonation, even just one nuclear weapon, but also getting into the ideas around nuclear war and or exchanges of multiple nuclear weapons as well. And it's undermined very fundamentally this approach to nuclear weapons that looks at these as somehow abstract tools. The UK calls nuclear weapons their nuclear deterrent. They don't even use the word weapon when they talk about a nuclear weapon. They describe what they think it does for their security. And this is the way that all the nuclear armed states see and perceive and project their nuclear weapons. They describe themselves as nuclear powers. So this series of conferences really started to undermine that and sort of dissect that. And it was very clear through these meetings that were very well attended by most countries in the world, also by the International Red Cross, international humanitarian aid organizations and human rights organizations. And the overwhelming sort of consensus at these meetings is that there's no adequate response to nuclear weapon detonation. There's no way the international community would respond. It would destroy our lives as we know it, no matter where the detonation occurred. So this has been really good, and building up a sense of collectivity around non-nuclear armed states, building up a sense of rage and injustice and frustration, because in the meantime, of course, the non-proliferation treaty meetings have continued and failing to implement agreements from 2000 and then from 2010, and then couldn't even reach any agreement in 2015. So there's a growing sense of frustration with the inability of the nuclear armed states to really take their commitments seriously and to follow through on things they agree to. And then on top of that, them boycotting these conferences really, really angered a lot of states, a lot of powerful states that don't have nuclear weapons. So all of that resulted last year in the General Assembly deciding to set up this working group that I started with, that's been running for the last year. And as I said, it was open to all states, but the nuclear armed boycotted this as well, just as they did the Humanitarian Initiative conferences. And it was an interesting series of discussions. It met for a few weeks in February and in May, and then for 1 week in August. And in the May session, it was really interesting because all of a sudden, we had all of these states that were coming out very strongly behind an idea that ICAN and a few very small core group of states has been promoting now for a few years, which is to negotiate a treaty to prohibit nuclear weapons, even if the nuclear armed states don't want to participate in those negotiations. So it's one of these really interesting things about advocacy where sometimes for years you feel like you're bashing your head against the wall and nobody's picking up on this idea and you're just saying the same thing over and over again. And then all of a sudden, 107 states are saying what you asked them to say 4 years ago. It's like, oh, great, well, glad you guys are here, excellent. Do what you will with this. So we had a real surge in May in support of this, which of course freaked out the nuclear armed states' allies, which they had operating the rooms as proxies. Number one of those, of course, was Australia, doing the dirty work for the United States and other countries. But there's a small core group on that side too, about 22 countries that all include nuclear weapons in their security doctrines. So some, like Australia, have this notion of extended nuclear deterrence. Some misguided belief that if a city in Australia is bombed, the United States is going to bomb Russia. Seems pretty unlikely that they do that, but you know, your security policy is built on it, so way to go. But a lot of other countries have that understanding too. Some countries, including those in NATO, a few in NATO, have actual US weapons on their soil, and they have their planes that are all configured to drop those bombs if there's another situation where they feel that that's warranted, which is arguably, some of us say, in violation of the Non-Proliferation Treaty, but they kind of built that loophole right into the treaty, which is one of the problems with it. So those countries, about 22 countries, they don't like this prohibition idea. But some of them find it a little bit difficult to be too vocal about that because most of those countries are democracies, and there's overwhelming support from the populations in those countries for a ban treaty. We've polled in the Netherlands, we've polled here. Tim was just telling me yesterday that 84% of the Australian population wants a ban treaty, and actually only 2% were against it. The rest were sort of didn't really know what was being talked about. But 84 to 2 is pretty compelling that Australians would like to see a nuclear weapon ban treaty. It's similar numbers in the Netherlands and in Germany and many of these countries, in Canada as well. Many of these countries that are part of that NATO alliance or the Extended Nuclear Deterrence Alliance, but the populations don't support that. Japan, of course, is like, I don't know, like 98% of the country would like nuclear weapons to be eliminated, but the Japanese government is still very much opposing a ban treaty or any other steps towards nuclear disarmament. And in the U.S., what's the percentage of people? We haven't done a poll on this particular instrument for ban treaty. I'm not sure what it is actually for disarmament in general, because different questions have been asked since the end of the Cold War, such as, do you think nuclear weapons should exist? Or do you think the United States should have nuclear weapons as long as they exist? So we don't have that kind of, as far as I know, there hasn't recently been done any polling on this question specifically to the US public. But it would be very interesting to have that, and to have a very clear question about nuclear disarmament specifically, or the ban treaty specifically, as opposed to should the US have them, you know, if other countries have them. Because I think most Americans will probably say, yeah, if Russia has nuclear weapons, we should have nuclear weapons. But you have to phrase the question correctly, so that's something that needs to be done.
The Russians will be saying if America has them, then we should have them.
Sure. So where was I now for the polling? Oh, right. So, and the other thing about these is that these countries that are opposing the ban treaty internationally is that it's not just their populations, but a lot of their parliaments have actually indicated opposition to the government's position. So in Norway and the Netherlands in particular, we've had very strong parliamentary motions calling on their governments to change their position on this. And what's been interesting is that at these most recent meetings at the UN, it's largely neutralized the delegations from being able to speak out very strongly against it, because they do have these things going on back at home which contradict their positions. So one of the things, Tim and I just came up from Canberra, and one of the things that we've been doing there is looking at how to do something similar in Australia, to neutralize Australia going into the General Assembly. And so there's a motion that's been put forward in the Senate now that urges the Australian government to accept the recommendation of the Open-Ended Working Group and support negotiations going forward. So we're hoping that if this passes in the Senate, it won't have government support, of course. It would be opposition-led. But if the Senate has that as something that it can pass, then it could potentially make life a little more difficult, at least for Australia, come October. Which brings me to October, which is going to be really exciting. So, the outcome of this working group was completely directed towards October, towards the General Assembly. Whatever it does itself doesn't really matter. It was all about what it was going to recommend the General Assembly do. And after all these weeks of meetings in Geneva, the majority consensus was around recommending that the General Assembly start in 2017 negotiations for a prohibition treaty. Great, this is exactly what we want. And they tried to make a consensus outcome, so through the course of some long into the night negotiations, they came up with a formulation that made it very clear that the majority supported this, and that there was this other group of like 20 countries who didn't support it and wanted to continue on the same path that we've been on for the last 71 years, basically doing nothing. So that's all fine and good. That was acceptable. You know, it wasn't, nobody was happy, but it was good enough to get us to the General Assembly with what we wanted to do. And everyone came away from those negotiations thinking that that was agreed text. And then, all of a sudden, about 10 minutes before the meeting starts, we watched the Australian delegation run into the room, and they looked a little frantic, and we were thinking, what's up with them? What are they so upset about? And then the next thing you know, we have the Australian ambassador raising his placard and saying, us on behalf of 14 states, which was mostly Eastern European NATO countries, but also Italy, said we can't accept this report. And the chair said, all right. And then he moved on and had some other statements, and then Australia put up its placard again and said, on behalf of Australia on our own, we cannot support this report. And it's unacceptable, and it can't go forward like this. So that was even stronger than what they had delivered before. And then the Mexicans decided to make it a little bit harder for them and said, oh, well, are you asking us to vote on this? Because the chair was starting to move forward with that, and Mexico was just like, no, wait a second. Let's make them say it. So then made the Australian ambassador say that he was forcing a vote. So this caused a huge uproar in the chamber. We had to suspend for 30 minutes, move to a different room. Interpretation services left. This was late at night, after 6 p.m. We lost a bunch of countries because they just went off to, went home. I don't know. They had flights to catch. They didn't expect to be voting on this thing. They thought it was over with. They thought they'd agreed the night before to the text. So a lot of people left, but the group of Latin American and Caribbean states met very quickly in a caucus and decided, hey, if Australia wants us to vote, we're going to vote on what we want, not what we watered down in good faith to reach a consensus outcome with these guys. So when we reconvened to vote, Guatemala put forward strengthened text for the outcome, which instead of giving this wishy-washy language about majority support, it just said the Open-Ended Working Group recommends this. And that's what was voted on, and that was what was adopted. Like I said, we had 107 states indicate support for this initiative, but because it was Friday night after 6 p.m., only 68 were in the room, so it was adopted with 68 in favor, with 22 against, 9 abstentions. Australia's allies were furious. Japan was furious at them. Norway, Netherlands also very upset. It forced their hand. They had to publicly decide whether they were going to abstain or or vote against. Some of these countries, the ones I just mentioned, they abstained. Canada, Germany, and Italy, they voted against. New Zealand was very upset with Australia also. They couldn't get their minister on the phone, so they just didn't participate at all. They didn't want to abstain because they would have preferred to be in favor, so they just sat there with their hands folded and didn't participate, and then delivered a really scathing statement about Australia's behavior. So, yeah, I'm sure that, I mean, I understand there's something else going on underneath the surface there that's it's an extra dig, but it's good theater. So that's what happened there. So basically, Australia forcing the vote resulted in us getting a stronger, clearer recommendation to carry this forward to the General Assembly. It won, so you know we have a clear majority that supports this, and it will go forward at the General Assembly now. And it angered a lot of Australia's allies. It burned the two diplomats who were in the room, their credibility, because they negotiated in good faith this outcome document, and then they spoiled it at the end. So that's going to be very harmful for them in terms of, in October, their colleagues are going to laugh at them when they suggest things to water things down or change things. And it also, I think, for a few countries that were on the fence, it brought them over to the side of the band because they were upset about the way this went down and felt that the opposing side really isn't operating in good faith, and there's something happening outside of this room. I mean, did Australia really just decide on its own it was going to burn its own diplomats' credibility, or was there something else going on there from countries that were not present? So overall, it massively backfired for Australia and was very good for us. Of course, the reason to do this from the viewpoint of the nuclear armed states is that now we don't have a consensus report, so no one can say it was a consensus agreement going to the General Assembly. But that said, we still have the numbers going into October in the General Assembly. So we still have numbers on our side, and that's really good. And that's where the fight's going to be. They're going to have to come up with a resolution that contains a mandate to set up these negotiations now, to start in 2017. So that's the next step, is they have to agree on the parameters for those negotiations. From ICAN's side, our demand has always been that it's open to all states, but blockable by none. So it is not a consensus-based process. So you can't have the United States itself or sending a proxy in to shut it down, basically, and just be totally obstructionist. And also that it's inclusive of civil society so that we have a role and a voice and can participate. At the end of the day, the treaties that are negotiated among states, so we understand that there will be some things that we can't participate in, but we want it to be as broadly inclusive of us and also the Red Cross and other important groups as much as possible. So that's what we're looking for in the mandate, and supportive governments are on board with that. But there's going to be a fight. We know already that the United States is planning on sending a very large delegation, and we know that its intention is going to be to prevent this from going forward. We know that all of the allies of the United States that do have nuclear weapons in their security doctrines are going to be deployed at full force to mess this up as best they can. We know that one of their tactics is probably going to be around UN budgets. We're in the unfortunate position that the UN budgets are established for 2 years at a time, and we're in the middle of that. So they can say, oh, no, new money for meetings, we can't have this, sorry. So put it off till another year, and then they have a year to kill the momentum and go around and challenge capitals on this. So we're trying to come up with creative solutions to that with our government friends, and they're, of course, thinking 3 steps ahead. So we're fairly confident that this will go through, but we know it's going to be a battle. We know that after this working group in Geneva, all of the key supportive states were démarched by the United States, which means that there was calls at the level of foreign ministers to capitals saying your diplomats are out of line, you shouldn't pursue this anymore, etc. So far, that's been not a problem. Everyone at home has been well briefed. But of course, how far do they want to take this? How much pressure do they want to put on? This is going to be the kind of thing that comes up at General Assembly. It's all very unjust. It's all very big power politics. And it's something that we're going to be trying to keep our eye on and expose as much as possible in the countries in which this is happening and at the UN itself, and try to provide this sense of collectivity and solidarity among states so that they feel comfortable enough going forward that they're not alone in this, that the U.S. or others can't threaten them. We're hoping that the U.S. election actually helps us out a little bit there, that the system at home might be in a bit of disarray. So, but they're quite good at just kind of shoving through things when they want. So, so we're really excited about that, and we're very confident that we have the numbers and that we have obviously the moral authority, and that this is built up to such a thing that it's going to look really embarrassing for countries to backtrack from it now, which is the point we were a little bit lacking until this year. So things are looking good. We're excited. We're happy. We're energized, and we're hoping to have really good news for you by